We have a digital flag in front of us.
All right, there we go.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Lance, for being our flag bearer today. Color guard. There you go. We will move on to public comment, and we have Elsa Duranzo, and she wishes to address the executive committee. Elsa, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elsa Duranzo. Although I am here on my own behalf, I'm also here as representative of the Marathon County Dream Up Committee. We have been working for many months on a strategic plan of how to address the child care shortage throughout our county here. First off, I'd like to thank the county for being the lead applicant for the $75,000 that is part of the Project Growth strategic planning process. That has laid the foundation of our future considerations in what we can do to address this issue. And that is another key part of that is like how can we as a community in Marathon County address this issue, and what does that mean for everybody? Well, it means stability for our children, it means stability for the economic growth of our areas, and that's not just in Wausau, but also out in Stratford and Millis. They all are suffering the same issues that we are here in Wausau proper. Again, I'd like to also thank you all for those of you who've had the wonderful opportunity of hearing me speak in the past. Yes, again, thank you for that.
Thank you. Was that there was no others? Thank you. We will move on to item number 4 on the agenda, approval of the February 9th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting minutes. They were in your packet. What is your pleasure?
Move to approve.
Motion by Supervisor Langenhahn. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Seefeld. Any discussion on the minutes as presented? Seeing none, I will proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion to approve the February 9th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion is carried, and thank you. We'll move on to policy issue discussion and potential committee determination. Operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. And the first item is discussion and possible action by the executive committee. Those items are the 2024 budget timeline. So the timeline is in your packet. I'll turn it over to the chair of the HR Finance Committee and let him proceed. Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you. At the end of the last budget process, I know there were a number of members of the board that were looking for more opportunities to participate in the process, and we've taken those concerns and expressions of interest to heart, and we've tried to come up with a budget timeline that we wanted to present to this committee and ultimately the county board. And there are obviously two components, as there always have been. There's the capital improvement plan budget process, which is not changed all that much from in the past, whereas we will get the proposals in. We really rely upon staff instead of the capital improvement committee, and then present that to the county board in August, and that's rolled into the budget process and incorporated it into the budget when we finally approve it. So we haven't really changed that at all. But relative to the operating budget, there are a number of significant changes, and one of the things we wanted to do is create a special April meeting of the county board as a whole, committee of the whole meeting, where we basically talk about budgeting 101. What's mandatory and discretionary programming, we continually get that given a highlight. talking about what the funding sources are. Not all dollars are the same. You've heard the chair say that. We have levy, state and federal aids. We have revenues through contracts, user fees, and other things. And then we'll talk about budgeting priorities. And a lot of what we're proposing here is modeled after what St. Croix County does relative to identification of budgeting priorities. Now, budgeting priorities is at a very high level. What are the most important? Is it employee compensation? Is it health care? Is it other operational expenses? We would be asking the committees, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, to go back in and use those and provide some input, and the Finance Committee will assemble that information, present it to the County Board for approval. But then we'll talk about budget assumptions, and then we'll talk about what is the role of the committees in the budget process relative to program modification and recommendations. That's all going to take place in April. Then in May, so we're breaking the budget process down into educational, then we're going to talk about program priorities at a very high level, and then we'll talk about assumptions, operating assumptions, and then we'll get into the budget. So the priority process there would be an expectation that all of the standing committees at their May meeting try to go through the budget, the priorities, and rank them. Again, there's the priorities is part of the packet, and provide the input to the committee. The committee will then, again, compile that and take it to the County Board for their review. That happens in May, and once we do that, the county administrator will communicate that information to the department heads. New position requests are going into the HR director to be reviewed by the administrator, similar to past practice. Then we'll begin working in July on budget assumptions. What sort of growth will we have? What healthcare costs might increase? Some of the things that drive it will work, or Wisconsin retirement system costs more money. Some of those things that would influence the fundamental parts of the budget, and then we'll use those budget assumptions to drive the budget. There are, then Lance the administrator will be working with the department heads to present that budget. This year, unlike past years, the budget will be presented to both the County Board and the HR Finance Property Committee at the same meeting. So we'll all get it at the same time. Not for action. What the Finance Committee does at that time is they accept the budget. It no longer is the administrator's budget. It then becomes the County Board's budget. So we begin to work off of that. The committee will then be meeting, and we may need extra meetings. Last year we had a very compressed schedule because of workload and other issues. We were late getting we're hopefully giving everybody it at the same time. We would look for people that would like to have amendments considered to provide those to the committee on October 6th. And the final review of the committee would be done on October 11th at their meeting. We then set that for publication. It doesn't mean that we can't change it, but the Finance Committee can't change it. It can make recommendations, but once it's set for publication and published, we really can't go back and make amendments to it and have it included in basically the initial budget proposed to you. So we would have to bring in budgets much along the lines of what we did in the past. We then go to public hearing on November 2nd. We would ask that amendments be based on the feedback we received from the public or any subsequent thoughts that the board has, provide those to the committee by November 6th. The committee would then meet on the 8th. I know that Supervisor Dickinson in a private discussion asked whether or not we could have more time in between the time that it goes to the Finance Committee and the time of the board. We can consider that going forward, and then ultimately to the County Board on November 9th. But the opportunities for input are at the committee level, both on the priorities and the assumptions. There will also be an opportunity to look at it and have discussions during the development of that budget. We would look for that type of feedback. So I think we're trying to be much more inclusive, but it's important that we sort of set the stage so people have a better understanding what that budget is Not all dollars are equal. I don't know if we'll leave that meeting with full understanding, but hopefully a better understanding of how that process works. I want to thank Supervisor Hart. He spent a lot of time working on this. He's gone through and pulled out what committees have jurisdiction in certain areas. We would like, for instance, for public safety to weigh in on the medical examiner and the sheriff. Areas and helping with that process. So it will require a lengthy, therefore a separate county board meeting in April to just go through. I think the first year will take more time than hopefully subsequent years, but we think that it is meritorious of a separate meeting just to get through those items. And I'm sure that there will be lots of questions at that meeting.
Administrator?
Thank you. The only thing to add, I think, again, the focus in working with Supervisor Hart and Committee Chair Robinson, I do think there's clarity around the board's opportunity very early in the process to start to put its fingerprints on the budget, which is something that we haven't historically had. I thought St. Croix County's idea of, again, budget priorities, which are in your packet on the page following the schedule, are really a great way to have that discussion. And it does, one thing I liked about having conversations with my colleagues, I liked about the St. Croix approach is it changes year to year, which is what your budget will do. So just looking at, it's on page 6 of 22 of your packet, we'll start with the first one, capital reserves. And this idea of what level of priority is it for the county board to use capital reserves during the budget building process of the funding stream. I'll tell you from speaking with my colleagues, it's very common that other counties do that. It's not so in Marathon County, and we've made that clear in previous budget discussions. We have an approach that we followed historically. That doesn't necessarily mean that in any individual year you might not need to dip into those reserves. And quite honestly, next year's a perfect example of it would be helpful for me to know the priority of the board of utilization of those reserves, because we are going to start out next year's budget building process with about a $396,000 structural deficit relative to utility costs. We talked about the increased cost of utilities, and we paid those with ARPA funds. Those are one-time dollars for an ongoing expense. So essentially we have a structural deficit. So if the direction from the board is utilize capital reserves for that, you would rank that as a lower priority, 2 or lower, to give me the direction to, hey, don't cut in other areas or search for opportunities to really tighten that up. Instead, we'll use capital reserves, where I would be making that decision based on our historical practice on my own. I think this is much better. That's just one example of how to use those. So I like the budget priority approach, and that's early in the process. As Chair Robinson referenced, the second piece is really the committee engagement. And I think the change we're making really stems from that committee of the whole educational meeting. We're going to talk about mandated versus discretionary programs to try to give all of the members of the board additional insight on the programs that are delivered by departments. So then when I do go to all the standing committee meetings and ask, are there certain things you want more of in terms of programs, or you want a higher level of service? Those things generally come with cost, but that you can provide that insight in it's easier perhaps for you to do that because you have a better understanding, a baseline understanding of what's required of us in terms of the programs that are mandatory or discretionary. Whereas the last year when I went and I had those questions, I appreciate the feedback that I got that it's really difficult to know because we don't know what's required and what's not. So we're hoping to, through some education and then specific committee engagement that Supervisor Hart worked on, to have committees have those conversations in a more productive way. And then lastly, individual members through budget amendments, we tried to structure the schedule to allow for individual members to offer budget amendments both prior to the HR Finance and Property Committee adopting and passing on the budget for publication, but then also after the public hearing, assuming that you may get feedback during that public hearing that an individual member might want to make. a budget amendment. So it's an iterative process. I hope to have this year's budget be more enjoyable for all of you than perhaps last year, and then the next year the same thing. And I already see some opportunities, and I'm not sure we'll be able to accomplish this year. We'll strive to do that, but a big one, building on Chair Robinson's point about not every dollar is equal. My vision is that we would incorporate a fee schedule essentially into your budget, because fees that you authorize or your committees authorize impact the budget through revenues. So it doesn't strike me as overly productive to not have those two conversations at the same time. If there's a desire to increase or a willingness to increase a fee to help for a service we provide, it's going to impact the budget, and that those things should be connected. And that's really a model that Brown County has, I think, pretty effectively done, as well as La Crosse. So we're pulling from the various counties that I think are doing a good job, but that was the approach that, at least from my perspective in working with Chair Robinson and Supervisor Hart, based on the feedback that we had heard, that we tried to accomplish those things. Certainly there are more opportunities for improvement.
So I'll open it up for additional comments and or questions, but I would reiterate that because you are the chairs of each of the standing committees, that it's going to be incumbent upon you as the chairs of those committees to engage your committee under the understanding that where you have impact on the budget or one of the opportunities to have impact on the budget is under the area of jurisdiction that your committee has. And the programming that's under those, under your auspices, and offering those suggestions as far as modifications to those programs, whether they be increase in service or decrease in service, and so like I said, I hope that you you as the chairs of those committees have an understanding, that that's a great time to have those discussions. Now, every supervisor is going to be informed that, if they have an area that they feel that they want to have a discussion at, they have the opportunity to attend those committee meetings to understand, those impacts. So I'll open it up for other questions.
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Longenon, please.
My question would be for the administrator. A lot of programs that Conservation Planning and Zoning does, such as rezones, for example, we rely on fees for those. We typically, if my memory serves me correctly, adopt our fees by ordinance, and we usually do it in the fall if we need to adjust, because I think that's built into the budget assumptions for the upcoming year. So if you want to do that in lockstep, would the ordinance amendments be approved with the budget then in November to make it parallel, or how does that work?
That's the thing that I'm talking about. I don't think we're going to get there this year, but you're right. What's that process look like for ordinances that relate to fees? And I'll give you one example that we're going to be bringing. I just went through public safety earlier this week. Your ordinance actually has required since 2016 that the county board, through its annual budget process, address fees for the medical examiner's office. I can't recall that actually ever happening. I got here late in 2016, so I don't know if it happened earlier, but trying to get, what does that timeline look like for each of the various fees? And I'll tell you, you have a lot. I believe, for context, Brown County's fee schedule is either between 17 and, for whatever reason, 29 pages long in my head. And there's a lot of fees that we have across various departments and program areas, and some, to your point, Chair Longenon, are addressed at
Not here.
a committee.
I'm not the chair here.
That's addressed at individual committee levels, and some are addressed at the Park Commission or the Board of Health has historically looked at fees. My sense on that, my feeling, and I'll take whatever direction you have, is ultimately the county board, you adopt your budget. And all those fees, to your point, flow into the budget. So you should be involved in that process. I don't know what that looks like. That's the opportunity I see perhaps for 2025. I don't know that we'll get to it this year because we have a lot of other changes we're making, and we need to do some work we're still going to be working through for the rest of the year, but integrating the idea of other revenue sources other than tax levy into the budget process is really important.
Well, in some years we don't adjust because we already, for certain programs, charge enough that we need to cover the cost, or for some we rely on the levy to cover a certain percentage of that program, which that's a philosophical topic that each standing committee can talk about. But, I mean, I guess ERC is already doing it. It's just that from here on out, we would always make a note in September to make sure that that's provided ahead of time for you to develop the budget. So.
Correct. And to your point, another point you should be the schedules have been different. The medical examiner's office, for example, by statute, they are prohibited from raising fees other than through CPI, the increase over any 12 months of CPI. So you can't do it, for example, twice in a year, or you can't exceed CPI. So that limitation doesn't exist for certain ERC fees. There are other statutory requirements we have, to your point, that we can't go out and just seek to generate revenue beyond what our costs are to deliver the service. That's not how government works. But streamlining that process, just like we're talking about streamlining and better understanding this budget process, I think is, again, another opportunity for us to tackle. I'm just not sure we're going to get to it.
Yeah, and then one more comment. I'm impressed with the proposed schedule, and I applaud those of you that worked on it. I think these will be worthwhile changes in the future to give us some more time to work and gain feedback on the budget. So that's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other Supervisor Ben Cray, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just put a request in that for that April Committee of the Whole meeting, if that could be scheduled sooner rather than later? So if it's during the day, working people have time to plan, and if it is going to be during the day, maybe like a doodle poll or something that would allow people to give feedback.
I know it's going to be difficult to try to schedule because we're anticipating possibly 6 hours time or longer for the educational meeting. But trying to find a day in April, you're right. I was hoping to provide, at least a request for comment at the March 16th meeting to the full board. So providing everybody an opportunity, but very short window to try to set that time frame. Absolutely, thank you. Other discussion
along the lines of the.
Dickinson, sorry.
For interruption. So along the lines of the April meeting, is that something that would be done with every new board? So if that's the case, then it should, maybe do you have an alignment with the organizational meeting and kind of think about that, and how that's going to,
I've had a thought about that. If the organizational meeting is going to, that it would be 2 weeks after the organizational meeting, but still try to get it in April, so that there's a deer in the headlights look. Obviously, the first day of the first 2 meetings for new board members, as I recall when I was the first board, and all of the education that was provided prior to the first meeting. But there's also, so yes, we're looking at trying to coordinate that after the first meeting of the board. So it'll be
a couple additional questions.
Go ahead, please.
So with the decision matrix, when you have the 5 boxes on the left, which are the categories, you have on the right, you have the ordering of the decisions. Is this amenable or amendable? Excuse me. Is this the way it's going to be? Are there other items on the left besides these that someone might find important?
Absolutely. I make no. Very clear. I just borrowed this from St. Croix County and talked to their administrator and what has worked well for them. That was a point of discussion at HR Finance. Are the right things in those left boxes? We made some changes in terms of kind of how things are worded. We added a few boxes to the right in that matrix, what response I would envision as your administrator. Based on our systems, the boxes were a little different. For example, under employee compensation, St. Croix County is a step system county, so we needed to make some changes in terms of the response based on the priority level in terms of how we ordered it. But absolutely, to your underlying point, if there's something else that, hey, what's another budget priority in terms of direction you can provide, I think all the better, but honestly, selfishly for me, I hate to go through the work of the budget and present the board something that, hey, they never wanted in the first place. They had something else in mind. I think this is a step in the right direction, but by no means are those exclusive boxes that you have thoughts. And I'll share there's a question at HR Finance about what's the mechanism for how this moves forward. And my understanding, I've watched a couple of St. Croix County meetings. They essentially rank file these. The board adopts a resolution that says in these are the priorities. Number one, perhaps, one is health insurance, two is employee compensation, capital reserve preservation, and they do for each of those areas, and that's in resolution form, and then administration has Chair Robinson, HR Finance Property Committee Chair Robinson takes that and has a conversation with department heads. I've been having that, and I understand my predecessor had the conversation with department heads based largely on the budget assumptions, which are a different piece. And budget assumptions are what do our revenues look like, what do our expenses look like relative to health insurance increase costs, what do we need to plan for employee compensation. But we didn't engage the board historically on employee compensation. What do you think? Where do you think we need to be? That hasn't been a board conversation until later in the budget process, when the budget's being adopted, which I do appreciate that there's a better way to do it. So if you do have another idea in terms of what should be on the left, I'm happy to add it or speak with St. Croix County to see how they address a similar idea.
Yeah, I might not have it. There might be some other supervisors who do, but.
Go ahead, Supervisor Robinson, please.
I think this is an iterative process. It isn't a final process.
Right.
I think we're going to go through, as we go through it, say, we could have done that better, or why didn't we think about this? It's trying to just get a playbook, if you will, in front of everyone, so you have a basic understanding of when are you involved, what role do you have, and then how does the process work?
I think what we've seen from, and we're not being critical of any of the amendments that were offered last year, but there was a little bit of a lack of understanding of, one, a dollar in the budget is, every dollar in the budget is equal to a dollar of tax levy, and then also an understanding of the distinct differences between capital budgets items and operating budget expenses. So my hope is that this education of the committee of the whole is at least a grounding in a base understanding of how the budget is built, how the supervisors have the opportunity to impact that budget, and again, it's a inclusive rather than exclusive process. Other discussion, Supervisor Dickinson.
So there was a comment made about committees doing the priority work. Just to be clear, those supervisors, if there was a supervisor who was not part of a committee, are we suggesting that that supervisor show up? I think you had said that the supervisor would show up at that committee and make some recommendation, but it wouldn't really be voted on. It might not be taken up by that committee, so then kind of where would the supervisor go in that process would be just something to consider within the realm of things. I don't know if there's because committees can kind of, I don't want to say stonewall, if that's the negative word, but they could kind of say, well, we're not going to move forward with that. Then where would the supervisor have the alternative to go to? Something to consider.
Yeah.
So.
Supervisor Langenhahn.
I was just going to clarify that this will ultimately be then, assuming that this gets approved today and goes to the county board for its adoption, this will ultimately be the guiding playbook, if you will, for this next budget, correct? So this will be essentially a policy that we will follow.
That's the hope, absolutely. Yep. Other discussion, other comments?
I just had one more, and that got into the timeline that we had spoken with Supervisor Robinson and with Administrator Leonard earlier. And that one of the concerns last year, and you mentioned it before, is regardless of all the amendments and all the work that was done, we got down into 2 days of five-hour meetings where the HR Finance had their 5-hour, and then we had the next meeting the next night. And so, as I had mentioned, I would like to see some space, get some space in there where if we end up with 19 amendments, that due time would be given to them so we wouldn't get into the place where we felt like we need to just be done here. So that if there was a potential for 2 county board meetings, a continuation over multiple days where people could plan in advance, just something to consider with that, because I can see that happening even ahead of time, even with all the opportunity to go to a committee or present an idea. If it doesn't get adopted in some way, you're still going to end up with amendments, and there probably will be some people who won't go on early in the process to try to make changes or introduce certain priorities. So that's where I say when we get right down to it, it really could put us in a bind if we didn't have a little more space.
I think we've tried to build as much time in there as we can. I think the comments that were reiterated was, the public hearing is statutorily required. The date is set by statute, as is the adoption of the budget is set by the statutes. So it's difficult to waiver those dates. But we try to provide as much opportunity in the forefront, and also obviously once the budget is handed from the administrator to HR Finance, there's a time in there for amendments before the actual publishing of the budget. Once it's published, again, statutorily we cannot change the budget between the time it's published until the public hearing date. There's also understanding that the constraints are not self-imposed, in some cases imposed by state statute.
I just want to highlight something that I think was the main takeaway of last year's budget process. Was I think that there was a difference in perspective amongst many county board members. To Supervisor Dickinson's credit, you make a very good point, which is even if you put a policy together like this, there is nothing stopping from somebody from an hour before the meeting going to Corp Council and drafting a budget amendment. There's absolutely nothing that can stop that. But I do want to highlight something, which is that if you go back all the way to October 11th, where that publication notice by the papers is done, and even beyond then, you essentially have 3 months' time to provide input to HR Finance or any of those standing committees about the priorities that they have in the budget. So to a certain extent, I guess I have to ask the question, how much is enough time? And that's not necessarily to anybody, but going back to what I was saying about perspective, I think a lot of the new county board supervisors felt like it was a span of 2 weeks and then down to 2 days after the hearing was there, because they never experienced it before. This at least spells out on paper that you have really 3 months of opportunity to provide feedback on whatever priority is you care so much about in that budget. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Supervisor Dickinson?
Yeah, I would just make the comment in that okay, it's 4, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's fine.
All right.
Up to you.
Yeah, we'll move on. I mean, I think the point is taken. Any other discussion on the budget timeline?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve this, send it to the county board.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Robinson to move this forward to the board for its adoption. Any discussion, any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the budget process and timeline as spelled out and moving it to the full board for its consideration, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Creation of the energy...
Before you move on, could I just ask that at a future executive committee, we visit what our expectations are of each of the committees so that we have a uniform set of expectations as we roll out the budget priorities and other things. So I think we'll have to do some education of the county board, but also how would you handle that discussion at your committee level, right? As an educational item in the future?
I think we'll have that after the CAL meeting.
But as soon as possible after that meeting.
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
All right. That's fair.
Okay, moving on. Item number 6B2, creation of energy task force and the charter in the packet as approved by HR Finance yesterday. I'll tee it up a little bit. At last month's executive committee meeting, there was some feedback on the proposed charter by the task force that was been offered by HR Finance. HR Finance took that back, had discussions on those items, made some modifications, and now have the charter in front of you for your consideration and review. Now, Supervisor Lemmer's here and Supervisor Robinson as the chair of HR Finance, if they want to add anything as to the deliberation that took place in HR Finance and the review of the charter itself. Supervisor Lemmer?
I watched the last executive committee meeting and just took some notes on what some of the suggestions were. And so then we went back and took a look at the charter. So one of the questions was, why is this not on the strat plan or the strategic plan? And it actually is. It fits under 5.2 or 12.3. I think the most reasonable is to focus on 12.3, which is the cost-effective public services. Another question had to do with the administrator's work plan or the administrator's plan. It's not on it, but on August 23rd, we did actually discuss the energy and being, there's a whereas kind of down there where you can see where we're developing policies aimed at the county becoming more environmentally and fiscally sustainable. So that really was there. I can give you a timestamp if you want to go back and watch that. As far as the budget process, the timeline has been kind of battened down. If you go back down to the charter, you can see there are specific dates and a sunset. Obviously, it would go to the end of this next term, so around April of 2024. And some of the other criticisms, for instance, the vagueness of the membership, I think that's mainly because it really depends on availability. I think quorum issues, I'm not sure if we can really tighten that down too much, but it would be all of the following, and then obviously HRFP, environmental resources, once you sit at the table, infrastructure to me is an obvious one. EED, I think, has some there, and some of the others as well. So I don't know if you've got other questions, or Supervisor Robinson has things to add.
Supervisor Robinson, anything to add to the charter and or the resolution?
Well, again, the fundamental reason that we're one of the fundamental reasons is we've seen a significant increase in utility costs. And in my discussions with people in the industry, they don't anticipate that natural gas is going to come down, given what's going on in Europe, conversion of natural gas to Europe. So I think it's incumbent upon us to take this opportunity to look at how are we, or what opportunities do we have in the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, both create opportunities that were never there before, and I think it's a worthwhile endeavor, again, consistent with the existing strategic plan, providing cost-effective services. And I want to thank Supervisor Lambert for her championing this cause. And it is internally driven. It is aimed at county operations and looking for ways for us to reduce our footprint, both in terms of cost and others, but there are great opportunities that present themselves. And we've tried to address some of the concerns that were raised. I know that Supervisor Lanahan, he had expressed, does somebody from ERC need to be on it? And I think there's enough flexibility in there that we would look for some expertise in among the county board without saying that specifically that committee had to be represented.
Questions or comments? Supervisor Lanahan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I talked to Rick before the meeting, and he said he volunteered already, so he's going to represent our city.
Committees at once?
Yeah. Right, Rick? Okay. No, I guess my honest question is, promote sound land use decisions that conserve and preserve natural resources and decisions with economic development and growth. I can see promote cost-effective public services, because if you can lower your costs, your reliance on energy theoretically, or shift the reliance that you have on certain types of energy, I could see that you could lower costs. But the sound land use decisions, I always took that to mean that the land use decisions that, impact, well, the land that's within the county itself, I didn't necessarily interpret that to mean like the land that the county owns necessarily. So is that the way that this is written, that this would be kind of like a facilities management thing, in which case I would say I still don't know if ERC would get involved here, at least not with this goal from the strategic plan.
It's, when I was looking at this, there's so many ways to go, and there are carbon credits you can capture with forestry, things like that, and so maybe ERC doesn't need this. There's a zoning thing that has to happen with it. I just don't know enough about it. And so for me, casting that wide in case something comes up. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's just kind of where I'm coming from on that. And Sean has...
Supervisor Robinson?
Within the purview of the ERC is, the parks and other things flow through you. And there are a significant portion of the budget are there opportunities within the parks operation. And again, it isn't requiring that each of these groups be represented. The request is that, or the illustration is there so that...
And the participation isn't a criticism. I'm just really trying to draw the line between the work that ERC does and how it would be impacted by some findings related to this task force. That's what I'm trying to share.
Supervisor Dickinson, please.
I can kind of comment on that, because when you mentioned reducing your imprint, you tried to struggle to find the word, Supervisor Robinson, as the chair here, the word you're looking for was carbon, and that was what was just stated by another supervisor. But this isn't about this kind of focus on renewable energy, although maybe it is. I made those comments last month, that what is this truly about? Now we're talking about costs, and I get that. But I also did mention this idea about renewable energy. And so what you have now in front of us is a greater focus within the resolution and the comments at this meeting about renewable energy. And so that's fine. But let's be clear and open about that focus of what some people may or may not want. When we cast the net wide and we talk about carbon credits, it does tie into the ERC, because part of the strategic plan for the ERC states that we're going to purchase an average of 300 acres of forest land a year. Well, now if your strategic plan is talking about purchasing 320 acres of forest land a year, well, that ties right into how you're going to make money off of carbon credit. So my concern is, and I've stated this before about the strategic plan and that particular item, this ties into that and gives me greater concern about the reach of the county and why we are doing certain things. Now, we may not have, people in this room or people who want this to move forward thinking that, but that doesn't mean that the next county board won't be the ones who do and extend that beyond what the original intent is and cast that net even wider. So I stated last meeting that I am not against reducing the use of energy. I'm not. Solar panels on top of county buildings, for example. Okay, you probably can't put them on the library because of the issues with the structure in the third floor. I'm just making a joke. Sorry, library. But the rush to do it and to move it forward and to get it done by a certain time is another one of the concerns. And so I'm going to continue to talk into that so that I don't lose my 3 times to speak. But by October 1st, you're involved in the CIP process. So this timeline that we're given is saying we want to be involved in the CIP process for next year, even though at that time there is no vote on all of the items being presented by the task force, because that actually comes next year by March 31st. That's when the final report comes to the board. So now, ahead of the decisions of our budget, I would think we would be moving in a direction, if we have some information by October 31st, to say, hey, let's consider that, and then we get the report in March. Well, you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. Additionally, I would state by March 31st, if you present it by March 31st, there is no meeting of that current county board to decide on that final report. There's going to be a new board. So I would suggest within your time frame that you certainly move back that March 31st so that the current board could be the actionable board for something as important as this. Otherwise, you're flipping and you're getting, I think that would be a concern. Additionally, when we talk about prices and such, do we have any idea what solar and other renewable costs are? I would assume that logistically it's probably difficult to get materials, and I would assume that the cost of those materials is also probably pretty expensive. So it seems like it's a slam dunk being stated that we're going to save money. And I don't necessarily believe that to be true. I know there's a return on investment on solar of maybe 14, 15 years. Well, yeah, 7, I don't know. Whatever that might be, I don't know. So there's multiple things in here that are my concern, and ultimately I'm not going to vote for this. I don't think we should be doing it right now. Yes, we have the strategic plan, and yes, we're going to wedge this into an outcome measure so that it works. It's not technically in the strategic plan. It's kind of broad what the reducing cost is. It's really, again, about this other thing of renewable energy. So I'm not going to vote for it. At another time I might, but not at this time.
Mr. Chair. Two things. One, doesn't the county board still meet before the reorg meeting in April, or am I misremembering?
It does not have a meeting in April.
So you go right into the organizational meeting, the reorg meeting.
In April, the first meeting of the board in April, any board, is the new board, and that's the reorg. So, and that was discussed when we set that date, prior to March 31st. It was at least it was understood by me that it was going to be brought to the last board, this board's meeting for review and or adoption or rejection once the final report was.
Do we know when the date of that meeting is?
March's meetings for 2024 have not been set yet. Now, they're spelled out in our rules, but depending on some other things, conflicts and stuff, we could move, to adjust, we could move it back to that date
So my second comment is that we have had task forces in the past to look into things. Downsizing the county board is a perfect example. You would think that a task force entitled county board size would have an effect on your size, but it didn't. We're still sitting at 38 members, and we looked into it. We collected information from the public. I guess to follow up on that point, though, is that I think that in the interest of reducing costs over the long term, the county does need to start looking at this issue more seriously. And if the creation of task force will allow us to do so with no fiscal impact, by the way, at least not direct, I could support this. I would say, though, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make an amendment to this the creation of the task force, but I believe there would have to be a motion to...
We have first have that motion to put it on the table first.
I would move to approve the creation of the Marathon County Energy Task Force.
And I'm just not trying to put words in your mouth, are you also adopting the charter at the same time?
Yes.
Okay, there's a motion to approve the resolution to create the Energy Task Force and the adoption of the charter. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Robinson. Now, further discussion. Supervisor Boots.
So many of you know, probably some of you don't, it's kind of what I do for a living. So I've really read through this a lot of different times, and I kind of agree that it wouldn't hurt anything to have this in place, but you're doing two different things. You're trying to figure out what's going to be economical for the county. You're also trying to put in, let's be green in Marathon County, and it's two separate things as far as wind energy, solar energy. To Supervisor Dickinson's comment, you can get a cost on solar panels real easy. I'll tell you what it is, but that changes very fast. It is also how much incentives you're going to get from organizations for the solar panels, same with wind energy. I don't see a problem having it because it is a task force, like Supervisor Langenhans said. And I also think that depending on who you have for the members, what direction this thing is going to go. It really is. And so, for instance, I mean, if you go to operations and you say, okay, what are we doing for lighting? That's an operational thing. It's okay, are you using LED lights? Are you using new boilers with 10 to 1 rate turn down rate, energy efficient? Are you doing, I mean, there's certain things you look at every area that they're probably already doing, which this committee could say, are you doing this? Are you doing that? Are you doing that? But for the most part, they keep up to date with that. They should be anyway. I'm not positive. I'm not in there doing that. But they're doing those things. They want to know, are you using freak drive? They're doing this. Totally different than should we be looking at a different energy source to do this stuff. So the charter I get, but reading this, which I've read it several times, we're kind of trying to do two things in my mind. And that's fine because it is just a energy task force. But depending again on the membership, this is going to go two different directions, I feel.
I guess my comments would be this, and that is to explore whether or not there's cost efficiencies, cost effectiveness in the policies that we have in place on the facilities that we have and the energy costs that we have. Are we, and I would probably make the argument that we're not doing everything that we can right now from a facility standpoint. I don't know that we are, utilizing LED lights wherever we can. But I think that's one of the things that the task force is designed to look at and explore. I'm not sure that we are or aren't. That's my point is. You're 100% correct. It could go two different directions, but if we don't explore both sides, we don't have an answer to whether or not one's more cost-effective or not.
I just add one more thing. The amount of times that people have said, I don't know, in the last 10 minutes is staggering, right? So one advantage of this could be some certainty going forward for the county. I'm not saying it's going to dramatically reduce our costs, but at the very least, you would get some more information about what the current baseline is, at the very least. I do have one more thing to add, and then I would like to make an amendment to the, I think it's page 10 of the packet, where it outlines that timeline. G4, by March 31st, 2024, incorporate input from committees into a final report and recommendations to be forwarded to the county board for its consideration possible adoption. I'd like to amend that to read by February 28, 2024, incorporate input from committees into a final report and recommendations to be forwarded to the county board for consideration and possible adoption.
So you're wanting the report by February 28th and the report to go to the full board for its March meeting?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Robinson. Any other discussion on the amendment? So again, the amendment changes the G4 from by March 31st, 2024 to by February 28th. The report is then forwarded to the full board at its last March meeting for its consideration. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried and unanimous. Now back to the motion as amended. Supervisor Booth said it.
Well, and that's where I say that I don't know. I agree it is I don't know because this isn't, we're a policy board. The implementation is, listen, facilities take care of it. That is part of their job. I mean, I would say that depending on the administrator, or not the administrators, but the operations that I've talked to, County, Portage County, a lot of different facilities, he spent a substantial amount of time getting people involved saying, okay, do this energy audit, do this. We're the policy maker, we're not the implementation. So yeah, I can 100%, like I said, I agree, we can look into that. There's a lot of work that goes into energy audits, a lot. Like we need, gas consumption for all of last year and the year before. We need, and all those things, okay, well, how long is the payback on an LED compared to what, what cost of one is? All that stuff goes into the thing. For the committee to do that, I just think it's a lot of work. I mean, saying 7 members, it's a lot of work.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
So kind of along those lines, the strategic plan 12.3 talks about cost-effective services, and I don't think anyone has ever considered that to mean this topic. Otherwise, I think it would have been part of what the departments have been doing, what the administrator would be doing, and that gets into the work plan. This isn't in the work plan, so is this going to be just like last month where we are looking at amending the work plan to introduce this? I don't think we need to be doing this every month, every time something comes up, but I'm not looking at that, but again, it's the direction that's given, which ties into this idea of the fiscal. There is no fiscal impact. It does have a fiscal impact because there's going to be a lot of people from a lot of departments and a lot of supervisors going to a lot of meetings trying to figure out how to reduce costs. So in the resolution stating there's, maybe it's a terminology thing. It doesn't have fiscal impact because it's not coming, but it's going to be coming out of budgets to do these things. So, just having that clarity, I think is important. It does cost money to do work.
My third and final.
Good.
I guess, can I ask right now, operations, I mean, I assume a lot of this work is already being done as far as, I mean, I'm not going to try to ask you what's all being done, but I'm sure we're looking at things, the low-hanging fruit like LEDs and things like that.
Yeah, I think the overall approach for capital improvement planning is focusing on that. So whenever we have identified, and there's been plenty of opportunity to identify these areas, we're changing the boilers and the air handlers and all the things that you're talking about. We do have a very small pot of money to do sort of LED light bulbs and things like that, but I think that's another area where it ties back into the policy perspective to say, if this is the direction you want to move in, like LEDs gone wild, then we're going to need to have more funding in that pot so that the operations can utilize it and, replace LEDs with anything else that we already do. When we don't do comprehensive, so we haven't had the funding to do it. Same idea. So I think that those sorts of things come out of it. It doesn't have to end up being some sort of grandiose outcome. It could be small things that end up saving it some dimes. And, I suspect those all add up and are meaningful when you're looking at the budget at the end of the year. So yeah, everything we can do, we're doing, especially, with the newer construction and renovation and things like that. But the available funding for some of those areas.
Can I follow up on that one now? And that's where I was going with that. So you got to look at return on investment. So if it's a private facility that I deal with, typically I can go in there like, here's your return on investment, 3 years, one by changing this out. When I go to a county or I go to a school or this, it's not in our budgets, it's just we can't do it. Whether it is payback in 3 years or 2 years, that's what you run into. It doesn't fit into our budget process. So that's a huge part of any type of thing like this. It's not like the private industry, we can just like, let's do it, let's put it in because it's going to be paid back in 3 years. Doesn't fit in our budget this year, whether we can make money on it or not, we can't do it.
Can I enter, but I think that's what we're trying to get. Is there a opportunity to borrow money to, and I'm not saying borrow money, but is there an opportunity to redirect resources to something that has a payback of 3 years, because the taxpayer is expecting us to be able to do that. Private industry does it all the time. They look at it and say, hey, guess what, there's a payback in 3 years, 5 years, whatever. That's going to make sense. The county is not going to be not here 5 years from now, so should we as policy directing say we should be looking at that? I think that's one of the things we're trying to achieve.
I was going to say the same thing. I mean, you're in we're at an interesting time, HR, Finance, Property Committee, Chair Robinson reference. And you have the BIL money, the Inflation Reduction Act incentive. You also have ARPA money that's sitting aside that hasn't been allocated yet, that might be a tool to allow you to change your calculus and how you do those things. To your point, I mean, we're replacing boilers in this very building. You're all going to get a tour. That were older than a fair number of rooms. Not because it was financially advantageous to do so. That had been 2 decades ago. It's because we finally got to the point that we need to replace them based on their maintenance schedule. So it would be adopting a different strategy, which we would need to operationalize the project, 100%.
I'm out of things to say, but I can talk with you all day and go back and forth because there's more to it than that.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion as amended? And this would go to the full board for its consideration. So the motion as amended, is everybody clear? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion to approve the creation of the Energy Task Force and the charter, move it to the full board for consideration, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion is carried, but is not unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to update on the strategic plan. So you have in your packet the latest update to the strategic plan. Several of the items were taken back to various committees. In fact, the EEDC committee had several things go back to its committee and come back with its recommendations. And so now you have before you the red line proposal along with a clean copy of the strategic plan, updates to the strategic plan that is on the table for your consideration. Any discussion? Supervisor, Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the staff, the administrator, and all the standing committees that spent the last 9 to 10 months reviewing the 2018-2022 strategic plan. And basically, they cleaned it up, deleted some items, added some items. Things have changed since 2018 when this one was adopted. So there was a lot of time put into this and resources, and like I said, I think it was worthwhile spending the time on it, and I just want to again thank everybody for the time they put into it, and I would ask that you would support the 2022-2023 strategic plan update. Thank you.
Other Supervisor, please.
From the EED committee, get down to 10.8 and request for C, where it says cities and villages throughout Madison County develop good transportation access. I struggled with this at our committee meeting, to have this passed. Actually, I voted against it, but the committee did pass that and outcome measure number 3. I don't see where these two fit into the EED committee. That's my thought, but that's I did not agree on those two, and I still don't. But it's, that was up to my committee that they passed it.
Okay, Supervisor Longhorn, please.
Similarly, to Supervisor Seefeld's point, I would like to thank EEDC for going back and reviewing the feedback that they received from the original suggestions that they provided. I've chewed on this quite a bit over the course of the past month or so, trying to understand the work that the county and specifically that EEDC would do in relation to that particular project. And when I saw the revised language, I was somehow led on an even more different path, path that got me very upset, because for 10.8C and outcome measure 3, it says cities and villages, but I represent 3 towns. So I don't see how a full level of local government or a full entity in local government was completely left out of these 2 items. That makes absolutely no sense. In addition to that, I have a very big concern for item 3 with identifying 3 to 5 projects, because now it sounds like EEDC is in the business of picking winners and losers throughout our county with their infrastructure projects. I don't think either of these should be in this plan. If they were to be put on the table today, I'm not going to support these changes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other discussion? Supervisor Van Cray, please.
Can you just remind us, this is the document that will be going to the full county board no matter what, but exec would also potentially have our own document that could go?
No. So exec is the committee of jurisdiction of the strategic plan. We take input from all of the standing committees. Ultimately, the document that we forward to the full board is our document. And so whatever amendments we make is the amendments that we make and move to the full board. And so if a committee chooses to bring in an amendment, if we take something, for example, if the committee were to take something out and move it to the full board, then it could be amended at the board level again by anybody from the full board. But the work that goes to the full board will be our byproduct, taking the input from each of the standing committees.
All right, thank you. A follow-up.
Go ahead.
For 10.8C, I just think good is a strange word to use there, to develop good transportation access. Who determines what's good and what's bad, like maybe appropriate transportation access, if that were to stay in there? I know that's kind of semantics. And then just a thank you to Vice Chair McEwen for kind of championing this effort and coming to all of our committee meetings and listening to us talk about this 1,000 times. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, other discussion. Supervisor Dickinson first and then Vice Chair McEwen.
I was just going to make the comment of with the language. I mean, there's a lot of those little things like the word safe. We brought that up. We changed the word providing to supporting. You get into a lot of that. To Supervisor Longhorn's point, in our strategic plan, there's lots of local municipalities. So simply changing the words cities and villages to local municipalities kind of overcomes, potentially that issue. So I'm just throwing that out there. For thought. I do have 2 questions, and that they are one. I assume there's no other new items since last time. It was just these ones from EEE.
I believe those were the only changes.
I think public.
Excuse me, Administrator, please.
You can blame me for the multicolored highlighted. I'm trying to draw special attention to the new stuff, to your specific questions, Fraser Dickinson. The bottom of page 13 and the top of page 14, those were the highlights were two additions that HR Finance property had offered at a previous meeting, January 11th, but I think they were not included in the last document, and then there was the change, the verbiage change from providing to supporting. The last thing I'll say is I just highlighted on the last page of the document, page 16 of 22, the dates for each of those outcome measures remain in 2020 and 2022. All of the standing committees have looked at their areas of responsibility. Zach hasn't really dove into 12.3. The rest of the stuff, I tried to highlight where it was new since your last meeting.
So if it's yellow on the sheet, then that is new since the last meeting.
So then as a follow-up to that,
Go ahead.
which is the same question, so my second time speaking, but anyway. So I thought we had discussed the item, the E and F items at one of our meetings, specific to, that E is the embrace the Hmong population and explore linkage. I thought, so we had discussed that in exec, but so then HR Finance put it in, but it just didn't make it into the document for last time. Is that what happened? Okay, so yeah, I think my comment with that is, picking out particular populations of people for economic development, I am strongly against, no matter where they live. And the second, the targeting of remote workers, I think I talked about a similar concept there, because you have other kinds of workers you could be targeting as well. So now I'm going to leave it, because I think it's a conversation for the full board. I'm not going to get into this going back and forth and trying to make an amendment and all that, but I want to make that point about that. And then there was another part in here about, on the last page in yellow, and it talks about under outcome measures, item 2 on page, looks like 22 on the last page. Staff suggests a new measure as staff turnover can cause dramatic changes in percentage with the intent, but that's not implemented. So that's just a comment to that measure, is that correct?
Yeah, that was a comment that when we began this process, feels so long ago, I developed a kind of an update for all of each of the strategies. I gave in that document a little snapshot of what work we've done and staff's input on whether or not potential change would make sense. And that's just a comment from 9 months ago that, for outcome measure number 2, the number of people that would go through our leadership development program increasing by 25% isn't really a long-term target goal. We suggested you look at, if that was still a priority, look at some way to capture that. Not making any suggestion if you want to keep it in or not. We do have some leadership things we're working on, but it was in the original strategic plan. So we thought if you were going to keep it in, maybe a new outcome measure, we're trying to tackle it different.
Okay. And then just the last point is, so the task force charter was just approved by the committee. Do we need to insert that into this document as an amendment and then vote on that? Because we said that the outcome measure, there was going to be an outcome measure for 12.3 as part of that resolution, or, because that's in the resolution, I believe.
I think it's in the original resolution when it adopted, when you took that out, and I don't think it's been updated.
It's not in the, it's not in the resolution.
Do you want one in there?
I don't. Well, so then,
Go ahead.
I mean, I guess I would make the suggestion to put it in there, because otherwise, not that I'm going to make the motion, otherwise you're talking about cost-effective services, right, in that objective. And again, it doesn't really talk, it's not really about those kinds of things. I mean, it's a stretch there, so if you put an outcome measure in, then you at least get the focus, but I'll just throw that out there. I don't care either way. I just make the comment to you guys.
Supervisor, Vice Chair McEwen.
I think if we are going to discuss putting in the strategic plan, it would be under 12.3 as an outcome measure or a strategy. Because I agree, if we're moving this task force forward, that could be part of what the strategic plan, some outcome measure. What's the outcome measure of this task force?
I think the outcome measure from the task force is the report.
Right.
That's the outcome. Okay. But adoption of its, suggestions is still going to be something separate. So do you want the outcome of a report to be part of your strategic plan? I don't know that makes, to me, I don't know that a report is part of the strategic plan.
Fair enough. Well, I'm just saying if it's...
In other words, if the report is the outcome that the task force is going to deliver, and that's clearly what it is, so the task force is going to deliver a report to the executive committee, to the HR Finance Committee, okay, and then it'll be forwarded to the full board. So do we want in the strategic plan the development of the report? That's the only question that you really, not the recommendations, because those are different. So that's my sense of it. Supervisor Longhorn.
For E and F, for the two additions for HR Finance,
which,
I guess,
what number?
Sorry, 10.6, the ones that were just discussed. So E reads, embrace the Hmong population, explore linkage to St. Paul, Minnesota, and F, target remote segment of the workforce for relocation to the Wausau region. I guess I have two things to note. One is that I'd like a little bit more explanation from the HR Finance Chair. And two, I think possibly an alternative might be to put a goal in there of work with our regional partners to recruit workforce and grow workforce to Marathon County or something like that. I also agree with Supervisor Dickinson that it's interesting that the county would, I don't want to use the word target, but center its focus on certain segments of the workforce. I also struggle with that a little bit. So I guess in light of those ideas and, possibly if HR Finance would be open to, an alternative goal of, growing the workforce for recruitment and working with regional partners. At the end of the day, I still want a little bit more explanation. So
most of those initiatives were proposed by Supervisor Zhang. They came out of the Greater Wausau Prosperity Partnership Plan of Action. So they were identified by the community leaders in the business community as things that they were targeting in terms of their resources, and the thought was to capture it. And while it does specifically identify the Hmong population, it doesn't exclude other groups, but it rather targets it, as we do with many of the activities within the strategic plan. I'm certain that there's probably a willingness to look at it, but the rationale is it was based upon what the business community had put forth, their recommendations. There was a wide array of different recommendations, and we narrowed it down to those specific ones. And again, the remote worker was sort of getting into that quality of life, making, we're looking at making Marathon County a destination because of the water, the resources, the bikeways, and other things. And the thought was that if we could use that as a tool to try to attract some of those remote workers, you could do it independent of bringing in the businesses themselves. But again, it was based upon what the Chamber of Greater Wausau Prosperity Partnership had developed in their recommendations.
Well, I would offer a suggestion. It's that instead of embrace the Hmong population and explore linkages, I would put in explore and implement recruiting strategies aimed at population centers with significant linkage to Marathon County. That includes everyone. That would be my suggestion, to change that. That way you're not targeting one specific population. You're targeting Chicago, you're targeting Minneapolis, wherever the population center is, with linkages to Marathon County. So you're trying to bring back a workforce that's coming back to Marathon County, wherever they have moved to, wherever that population center and demographic has moved to. That would be my suggestion. Is there a consensus around that? Matt?
So I guess I want to clarify, are we going to try to do this tonight? It seems like everyone wants to just do it at the full board level is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Well,
It's just, are we going to have a 3.5-hour meeting now where things are going to get changed and yeehaw?
And change.
Went through it in every single standing committee meeting for the last 6 months?
May I make a comment kind of in tandem to that?
Supervisor
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the committees spent time on these items, and a lot of hard work went into it, and I just want to be respectful of that. Give each committee the option to have that go in front of the full board, and we can discuss it then. I think that's the appropriate way to take this. I guess unless any other committee chairs feel differently about the items they brought forth.
Well, the only thing I would say is because this is our work product, that would be the distinction that I would make. We're asking for input from the committees, and then we're agreeing that this. So what I'm saying is, if you're agreeing with everything that's in it today, then vote in favor of it and sending it to the board. But if you want to make changes to it, now is the opportunity to have that discussion to make those changes. I think it's a little disingenuous to approve it now, send it to the board, and then want to change something later that you've approved. That's just, Supervisor Langenhahn.
I'm not supporting what this has presented. So, and that pains me because I think ERC's outcome measures and the revisions that they did are good. But I'm not going to support it with those things included today. Thank you.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you. And again, I agree with Supervisor Van Cray. We spent 9 to 10 months on these committees. The first couple meetings, I did a lot more suggestions and talking, but I made it very clear that this was your strategic plan. These are the strategies that your committee is responsible for, and we asked them to make those changes. I agree, I'm not disagreeing with you, Mr. Chair, that there's going to be, if we present this the way it is, there's going to be changes there. But that's up to the full board. We can bring this or we can change it, but I think, there was a lot of time spent on this by these standing committees, and every one of these chairs were involved. People that are sitting here that were the chairs of these committees, they were involved in it. And like I said, there are some, I don't agree with that either, but this didn't come from infrastructure. So like I said, I would just as soon bring this forward to the county board, and if they want to change it, they're going to change it. And even if we make changes, they're going to make changes. It's not going to be, there's going to be people with different ideas. I'm just not saying it's perfect, but I think no matter what we change, I can guarantee you there's going to be changes from other people when it comes to the full board, which is great. That's what we're supposed to do. Thank you.
Supervisor Boots and then Supervisor Van Cray.
Would this be the time for a motion?
Your time for a motion.
All right, well, I'd like to make the motion per the request of the vice chair who is in charge of the strategic plan. Move this forward to the full board, the respect to the standing committees to have their input at the full county board meeting.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Is there further discussion? Supervisor Langenhahn, please.
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier with not supporting with this. That's fine. I mean, I anticipate there will be lengthy discussions at the board too, but I don't want it on record with my name supporting this as is right now. Because I have, like I said earlier, those EEDC things, I think they disproportionately put a focus on cities and villages, and that was more than just the words that were chosen, by the way. I think there's an ulterior motive behind that. So I'm not going to support this today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Supervisor Robinson, please.
I think one of our responsibilities as an executive committee is to put together a plan that makes sense and other things. And while I respect committees' involvement in other things, the role is for us to look at it on a larger scale basis and try to look at how things fit within our resources available and other things. And I actually like the language that Chair Gibbs had proposed relative to the recruitment. I think that ought to be in it. I too would have a difficult time supporting it in its present form if it went in, because it's written by several parties without necessarily that connectiveness. And I think there's value in us taking the time to just take that final review and saying, are these things that should be in the plan or not? And I would prefer that we amend it and refine it, and understanding that there could be amendments at a later date, and that there will be amendments at a later date, but I am uncomfortable advancing it as presented today.
And Supervisor Gray.
If that is the consensus, then let's make the amendments. Let's do this. We've talked about this for 5 months. Can we make the amendments? Let's go. We're here. We have the meeting.
Well, we have a motion and a second to move to vote on.
Yeah.
Right, we have a motion and a second, but it's also, is there any further discussion? I will tell you from my perspective, even though I can't make motions to amend, I will not support the motion as it stands, because I, one, don't support the way the item came out of 10.6E. I don't support that verbiage. I don't support the verbiage coming out of EEEDC targeting 5 projects. That makes no sense to me. If we were going to tie it to 5 projects that were specific to county responsibility, county highways or infrastructure, that's different. But we don't define what support is for 5 projects for cities and villages, and we're developing, what's the criteria and what's the definition of support. So I can't support the way it's written. Supervisor Boots.
So I could withdraw, and I will if that's what this body would like to do. It's not a big deal, but I guess the question I have then is this. We asked every standing committee to bring things forward, and now if we revise this document, be at the top of what they said there, and they're going to, in my mind, so then what document is going to be bring forward? Because now we're bringing a revised document instead of the document that was put out by the committee. Now the committee isn't looking at the original document they put forward. So that's where I think Vice Chair McEwen is going with this. He's like, well, now we have what they want, and yes, we may not agree with it, but we're bringing it to the full board. In my mind, either way it's going to get debated, but I guess if we had the original document from the standing committees, it's something we could talk about and understand why we're changing it. Want to change them now? I'm all for that.
Well, and my response to that is ultimately the executive committee is responsible for the strategic plan, and that's why we take input from the committees, but that's what we're doing, is taking input from the committees. We are the leadership of the board. If we feel that there's something that needs to be changed and we have the tenure on the board, we should be making those changes now. I'm sorry, that's what I firmly believe, and to say that I can support something and then turn around and say that I can't, because I'm only moving it to the full board, I can't do that. I can't do that.
Well, then I will withdraw my my motion.
Well, there always can be amendments to your motions.
That was the point. Yeah, I withdraw my second, then. We could talk about this next month.
So what is the pleasure of the committee?
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I'd like to refer the strategic plan back to the standing committees for further discussion.
Do you have suggestions that would guide them?
Thank you. Given the feedback that was received for HR finances goals and EEDC's goals.
So specifically, the 2 items that we talked about, the item 10.6 E and 10.8.
10.6 E and F.
Yep.
And F, keep in mind, because of Supervisor Dickinson's concerns that were raised earlier. And 10.8 C.
And outcome measure 3.
Yes.
And based on the discussion, 12.3,
And,
which was based on the earlier action, and that will,
well, 12.3 would be this committee's responsibilities. Right?
Well, isn't...
That's everybody's responsibility.
Oh,
Exactly.
12.3 is the executive's responsibility. So that's what I was getting at. If we're going to change 12.3, we change it here. There's no committee to send it back to. 12.3.
Okay,
Public Safety made a recommendation to change 12.3, but 12.3 under your 2018 matrix you set up for committee responsibilities.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Hey, so I don't ever recall us sitting and discussing 12.3 yet at length.
Can I finish? Let me finish my motion.
Go ahead.
Okay. I will just clarify that it's 10.6 E and F and 10.8 C and outcome measure 3. That's my motion.
So there's a motion, is it?
What's that?
Say that one more
Yeah.
time.
I would move that we refer the strategic plan work back to the standing committees for further revision, taking into consideration discussion related from executive committee on items 10.6E, 10.8C, and outcome measure 3. The last time I'm going to say it.
E and F?
E and F.
Sorry, E and F. Now it's the last one.
Can I, is there a second? Is there a second to that motion? Right, Boots with a second. I'm going to say something. We can refer it back if we choose to. I think we've referred it back to them with direction prior, and we've gotten the result that we've got. My take on that is it's ultimately the responsibility of this executive committee to make the changes that we want, if we're going to make those changes, unless we want to provide them with the exact verbiage that we want put in there. So referring it back and expecting a different outcome from that committee after we sent it back numerous times, I respect Supervisor Langenhahn and your motion. However, I think the proper thing to do would be for us to amend it with the proper language that we accept, and then move it to the full board. That committee will have an opportunity at the board floor to bring up their suggestions and amendments, and we can move forward rather than sending it back and another month holding off on the strategic plan. But that's my thought.
My final comment then for this tier of discussion is that I just heard a whole bunch of discussion about the values of the standing committees putting in their work. I think that some of the work needs to be revised. That's it.
Supervisor Van Cray.
To comment on that, sending these specific items back makes it, the message that I'm hearing is the executive committee doesn't like what you did, but we're not going to take the time or put the work in to change it. So you change it to how we want it to sound like, and then bring it back to us, so then we can say it's good. Like, and this is not a specific criticism to any person. I respect all opinions about this document, but this process has it got ridiculous 3 months ago. Like, we should have been done with this. So, you know, I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's time to move it on to the full board. I'm like, let's get this done with. We're 3 months into 2023. We don't have a strategic plan.
We have a motion and a second to refer it back, specific items, to refer back to specific committees without any direction other than to listen to the discussion had here. Any further discussion? Supervisor Van Cray.
Thank you. Can the chairs of the committees that things are being referred back to, are they interested in making any comment about how they think that this will be received at their committee, or what work will be done to change it at their committees?
Well, I can tell you, I take this back and throw out 10.8C and outcome measure 3. There is going to be different wording brought forward, and no matter what I agree on, like I did not agree on this wording, and I was voted down on it, but they're going to bring a different wording. It's going to be pretty much what you see here, but it's probably going to include towns, you know. But I don't think these two belong with EED, period, to tell you the truth. That's my thought. But I'm going to get kickback.
And my question, because we talk about vagueness, the outcome, identify 3 to 5 transportation projects proposals with the potential for high impact on job creation and housing development for possible future county support. So what is county support if it is in fact a town road, or if it is a village or a city road? I'm trying to understand what does county support look like?
So it's not going to pass, so can we call, I'm going to call a question.
Question's been called. Is there objection to question being called on the motion to refer? Any objection to question being called on the motion to refer back to the committees?
Just the committees that are affected by these, or all the committees?
The specific motion was to send 3 things back. 1 back to HR Finance and 2 items back to EEDC. That's the motion on the floor.
I would concur that that's my intent, for the record.
And so motion or question's been called. Is there any objection to question being called? Okay. We, without objection, then we will proceed to vote on the motion to call the question. Is that correct, or no? We just go directly to the motion.
So we're at the committee level.
Correct.
So things are a little bit informal here. I think if there's no objection to the question being called, you can proceed right to the vote on the question.
Okay, so the vote that we're talking about is the vote to refer back to committee the 3 items that we're referring to, 1 to HR Finance, and the 2 items 10.6 item C and outcome measure 3 back to the EEDC committee. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say no.
No.
No. Okay, we're back to Supervisor Boots.
So I can make a motion for an amendment to the, what you put in there for 10.6E.
Okay, 10.6E would read then, explore.
We need a motion to approve.
Motion to approve the document, then we can amend the document.
We already have that.
Yeah,
Okay.
you withdrew it.
I withdrew it, and the second was
Oh, because mine was to refer it back. That's it was to refer, but mine never got. But you withdrew it.
You withdrew it, so
But you never said I withdrew. You didn't say it was done.
well, the second withdrew, so then.
All right, that's fine. I will make the same motion I made before.
Yeah, I will second it.
Okay, the motion is to approve the document. Now we'll accept, if there's any amendments, we'll accept any amendments.
I will do the amendment that you had in for 10.6E about what was stated before.
Okay, 10.6E would say, and is there a second?
What did you state?
Let me state it first. Is to explore and implement recruiting strategies aimed at population centers with significant linkage to Marathon County.
Sounds good.
I second.
And there's been a motion and a second to amend 10.6E. read again. Explore and implement recruiting strategies aimed at population centers with significant linkage to Marathon County. Any discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to amend 6E to the wording I just read, explore and implement recruiting strategies aimed at population centers with significant linkage to Marathon County, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries but is not unanimous. Okay. Any other amendments that we wish to make?
Mr. Chair,
Supervisor Langenhan.
I would like to strike under 10.6, outcome measure, 10.8, I apologize. Under 10.8, I would like to strike C,
Anything with F?
and I would like to strike outcome measure 3. So remove them from the plan.
So there's a motion to remove 10.8 C and outcome measure 3. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Robinson. Any discussion? Supervisor Robinson.
You know, I think this is aimed at the metropolitan area, the Wausau metropolitan area, and there is a process through the Metropolitan Planning Organization where projects are considered if they're part of the Transportation Improvement Plan. It's a 5-year plan, and there are mechanisms, and the one project that's really driving this is the Kowalski Road interchange, and it is up to the village of Crownwater to complete the needs, the underlying study associated with it. And until they do it, it's not going to move. And, you know, you're asking us to commit resources to a project that we don't have to eye into because it is a village project. And there is a separate process by which those can be handled. And it is in the Transportation Improvement Plan, but that needs assessment needs to be done in order to move it. So you can't change the process with the state. It's a state project on a federal interstate system, and they can try as hard as they want to change the process, but ultimately the decision makers are not in this room.
Any other discussion? Yeah, motion was by Supervisor Langenhan, second by Supervisor Robinson. Any further discussion? The motion is to remove 10.8 objective C and outcome measure 3. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion of removing 10.8C and outcome measure 3 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is unanimous. Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion as presented?
It's the longest way around that in my entire history.
Vice Chair McHugh.
10.6, somebody wanted F changed. Did we vote on that?
I think government's inefficient.
E, but I thought there was F.
There's a question on it.
So we're leaving that one?
The motion wasn't to change that. You were talking about remote workers as a segment of workforce for relocation to the Wausau region.
Okay, I was just reiterating what somebody had a concern with it, but that's not a concern. That's fine. I'm not changing it.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Yeah, I had a concern with it because, again, you're targeting a specific kind of work group, a kind of worker which I'm just not in. I just don't think that's a good strategy for us. I don't think that, I mean, when you talk about remote workers, when you read that, so you're saying you want someone who works for a business in North Carolina to relocate to Wausau because they like it better so they can still have their job in North Carolina. Well, there are people who do it the other way too. So here it's talking about relocating to Wausau. Well, doesn't it help the business if they go someplace else when they're working for that business here? So that's part of it, and it's such a focused objective. I don't think it should be there.
So in my mind, I think what I'd like you said, we're looking at the Chamber of Commerce. Well, their vision is way different than the county board should be in my mind. Yeah, they're saying, how do we get people here? How do we do this? How do we do that? I don't see it have to be in there, but I mean, again, we've been to a standing committee, so I'm not I'm not up or down on this one, I guess, but I understand where it's coming from.
So I'm going to make a motion to remove 10.6F.
There's a motion, is there a second?
Wasn't this just adopted?
That was E.
No, E was changed.
Or is that another amendment?
Yeah.
Amendment, yeah.
Got it.
So this is another amendment to remove item 10.6F. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is made and seconded to remove 10.6F as a strategy, and that is to target remote workers as a segment of the workforce for relocation to the Wausau region. Any further discussion? Supervisor Robinson.
I'm going to pitch leaving it in. Again, it's a strategic plan where you're strategic in your efforts. It was identified by the chamber. We're trying to make the county a more attractive place through broadband expansion. We can lend our support to that initiative. I think there's merit. It is consistent with other activities that are taking place relative to the mountain outdoor sports and other things, and I think that I think it's a good thing to put in.
I think it was sure. I guess, is there a better way to word this then? Because if anything, you would want to say you want to have a attractive quality of life to encourage those remote workers that are out there to move to central Wisconsin, rather than just saying, hey, we want you to work for companies that are already here, but you can work from North Carolina. I think Supervisor Dickinson has a really good point. I think the disconnect is in the wordsmithing itself.
Further discussion?
I'll just make one last comment, if I
please.
may. I don't know what's so special about remote workers.
Yeah.
I mean, don't you want people living here and working? I mean, what's so special about a remote worker? They stay home. They don't go out and shop. They're on their computer. I mean, unless they're in the library or they're in the county park. And sorry, I don't think there's anything special about that workers or workers.
Administrator Leonard.
I don't have anything to respond to your question about what makes them special. I can tell you, I serve on the chamber board on behalf of Marathon County. One of the areas that other counties have done, to Supervisor Dickinson's point, is the targeting of remote workers is to move there. So they have Fond du Lac, for example, partnered Fond du Lac County with their chamber, partnered to offer an incentive to essentially get remote workers who can live anywhere to move to Fond du Lac to essentially buy a home, pay taxes there. So I believe they offered $10,000 in terms of relocation. And we actually vetted this around a little bit as a chamber as well, exactly what that looked like here. It never got any legs. But that was, as I understand, one of the genesis for why you target the remote workers, but not saying that I think they're special, or just want to provide that context of the conversation.
Call the question.
Is there any objection to question being called? Any objection to question being called? Motion is to eliminate or remove the strategy 10.6F, and that strategy is target remote workers as a segment of the workforce for relocation to Wausau and Wausau region. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to remove item 10.6F as a strategy signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion's carried. 10.6F is removed. Anything else? Any other items on the strategic plan? We do have the one item as at least a recommendation from staff on 12.6. Is there a better outcome measure than the suggested measure that we have in there by December 2022? The number of county employees who have completed Marathon County Leadership Development Program will be increased by 25%. Do we want something more specific?
Less specific.
Or you could deem it complete. complete, because we did it by December.
Yeah, well, so you increased the number by 25%, but from what point? And now you have had a turnover of department heads that are significant. So do we want to say that, is there a percentage of the leadership in the county that should have, always have completed? So in other words, said a different way, should 50% of the leadership have completed some form of leadership development? So that is ongoing.
Can I offer my 2 cents?
Please.
The leadership development and talent development, I have to say something you all know. It's very important regardless of whether it's in your strategic plan. We're going to have a strategy internally regardless of whether you put it in your strategic plan. I think you're not hurting me at all if you just say deemed complete.
Supervisor Dickinson.
So then I would offer an amendment to deem item number 2, outcome measure, deemed complete for the recommendation of the administrator.
Second.
Deemed complete and removed from the strategic plans.
Correct.
All right. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor. Any further discussion?
We're voting on.
Hey, Matt, center.
Moving and deemed item 12.6, outcome measure 2 and 3 deemed complete.
12.3.
12.2, excuse me.
12.3.
12.3, outcome measure 2 and outcome measure 3.
Okay.
No, just 2.
Two. Excuse me, just 2. Is there any further discussion? So the motion is to remove outcome measure 2 as being deemed complete. Item 12.6, or 12.3, excuse me. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
I'd like to call the question of the main motion.
On what?
On the main motion. The main motion,
We approved that 10.8 that Supervisor Long had. 10.8 with the cities and villages?
that was removed.
That was, we did do that, okay.
So now, is any objection to question being called on the main motion of moving the strategic plan to the full board as amended by this body for consideration? Any objection? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion now of moving the strategic plan as amended by this body to the full board for its consideration, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
And the motion is carried, but is not unanimous. All right. We will move on. Two, educational presentation and committee discussion. Committee agenda process. Had this discussion with the clerk, and per our rules, just so everybody's clear, the chairs of each of the standing committees are ultimately responsible for all of the committee agendas. And our rules also say that the committee agenda items need to be to the clerk by noon on Wednesday prior to the meeting week, the week prior to the meeting being held, so that it can be posted by Friday prior to the meeting week of the meeting. And so it's been, and I will own up to being as big a fault as anyone, that some items I am not getting to the clerk on a timely basis. So I wanted to remind everybody of what that time frame is. So again, if your committee is meeting on Tuesday of next week, you are to have the committee agenda items to the clerk by Wednesday of the week prior. And so it's been a challenge for the clerk in her office because a lot of those changes come in on Friday, and Friday's historically the clerk's busiest time with marriage licenses, you name it. And so I think being respectful for the clerk, we need to own up to the fault that we are all partially, sometimes it's not, not possible to have everything by Wednesday, but I think we need to do a much better job. Either that or we need to change our rules, because our rules simply state that they're supposed to be there by Wednesday. So that is, any other input, Kim?
I appreciate the comments, very much so, and the rules do say agenda and packet items, and I completely understand that sometimes packet items absolutely cannot be obtained by Wednesday, but at the very minimum, we must have the items for the agenda, and I guess to set some expectations, if I may, we need to have, the agenda format never changes from meeting to meeting. If you would send us the line item on the agenda where the item needs to go. Don't just say, here's an item to add to the agenda, because I don't know if it's an actionable item, if it's an item for discussion, if it's an educational presentation. So if you could please clarify exactly where on the agenda that item needs to go. We don't have the subject matter expertise to make that determination. So if you could be as thorough as possible in your requests, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm as guilty as the next supervisor, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I guess the thing I would like also, though, if we could, is if during the meeting, I said at the end of the meeting, can we have sent out, when he sends out, do you have anything for the meeting, things that I had said, please note this for next meeting in the notes, so we have those to see. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
You added to the minutes, and I think
we added it to the minutes, and then, you know what I'm saying, so we could see those before
the next meeting.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other discussion on that item? Okay, thank you for that. We'll move on to item 7B.
Can I ask one clarifying question of Supervisor Booth? Would it be okay to maybe give a summary of that rather than minutes, because sometimes we don't have a chance to get the minutes completed?
I just want a summary at the end. We always say any future topics being brought forward, and I say, please put in the minutes that I want this for the next meeting, just so we know we have something that we don't forget.
Just like we talked about it, when we're going to have a discussion on, at the 16th meeting, that we'll have a poll the board on committee of the whole meeting date. Okay, next item, item 7B, impacts of the governor's budget on Marathon County to be shared with legislators. So you have the WCA's summary and a link to that summary of the 23-25 budget. First off, before we get too far into the details of that budget, I think I attended last week the WCA Legislative Conference, and it was pretty clear that although the governor is responsible for producing and generating a budget, executive budget, and forwarding it to the Joint Committee on Finance for them to do their work, I think it was made pretty clear in that meeting there that the Finance Committee will take up the governor's budget, but their starting point is going to be much different starting point than the governor's proposed budget. I think it was made clear, at least from the leadership from both the Assembly and the Senate, that they're going to start from base budget. And so even though there may be some things that were offered in the governor's budget that is advantageous to counties, again, we've got to be cognizant of the starting point. The one thing that was pretty evident was a significant discussion by WCA with legislative leadership, with the executive branch also, and that was a remake, if you will, of shared revenue and where that revenue is coming from. There's a proposal that WCA has been working on in concert with the League of Municipalities and the Towns Association in trying to tie some of the support from local municipalities to the economy of the state. And the way that they initially offered that was they offered it by saying, well, 1 cent of sales tax is then going to be used to fund local units of government. And so that then ties the local units of government support from the government or from the state to the economic vitality of the state. So if sales tax goes up, the county's revenue goes up. If inflation happens and the cost of items go up and the sales tax go up, the county's revenues or the town's revenues goes up. So that was the impetus for a change. The WCA doesn't care who takes credit for the change. There's a little tit and tat back and forth between the executive and the legislative branch on whose idea it was. You know, as long as the continued discussion ties the economic support to local units of government to the prosperity of the state, we're not really concerned who takes credit for it. But that's one of the major initiatives that we're hoping stays in the budget, and it looks like there may be a way for that to actually happen. But there was a lot of discussion back and forth about what the governor's budget did, and how to spend the projected $7.1 billion of surplus that's projected. So with that, I'd offer up thoughts by the chair of the Finance Committee.
There are a couple of things. It's very customary for the legislature to strip out all policy issues and then budget back up, and they go with a this-year budget, which means last year times 2 is a starting point for discussion. But there are a number of things that are in the budget that impact the county, and I'm a member of the WCA's County Ambassador Program. We had a meeting in January. We went down and talked to the legislature, and the funding was one of those, but there's a number of others. But there will be some opportunities for us to provide feedback, whether it's one-on-one with our legislators or through the public hearings. There have been hearings scheduled for Eau Claire, Wisconsin Dells, Minocqua, and one other location later or in April, and we might want to do that. But we also, when I met with the legislators after consulting with Chair Gibbs and Administrator Leonard, we requested an opportunity to meet with our legislators on the budget at the courthouse to talk about what those priorities are. I think that the need to articulate a revenue source to replace shared revenues or as a way of funding shared revenues is critical. There's also, the governor has in there significant funding for broadband expansion, and everybody, you know, I've heard from legislators saying that, well, there's all this money coming down from the feds. Well, that statewide money is going to be $800 million to $1.1 billion for the state of Wisconsin. Marathon County's needs at one time were $190 million to $210 million. That money won't go very far. So I think there's a need to continue to have state investments in broadband and move away from relying on the FCC fabric, which is inadequate. And so I think we ought to be trying to promote that and get that work done sooner than later. I think our whole the whole issue of the morgue and the morgue task force is something that we ought to articulate and trying to get in within the building projects. But you know, I would hope that we'd have some specific to Marathon County and be able to articulate those and advance those with our legislators.
Jacob, please.
Was the morgue in the governor's budget?
There was communication from the governor's staff that said there was an opportunity to apply for a grant in a grant funding section that they had provided for of $150 million in the budget, but it wasn't spelled out specific as an item. But at the same token, we've had discussions at the WCA Ledge Conference. I had the opportunity to talk to Senator Kolakowski, who sits on the Joint Finance Committee. She and Senator Corey Tomczyk are authoring a separate bill to include the 10.6 funding for, so it may come out of the budget, but be a separate bill moving forward. So that was as of yesterday. Even though the budget itself, again, the budget from the governor didn't spell out that there was specific money for a specific project. There was in his discussions, there was $150 million project for, what was it called, neighborhood?
Neighborhood Investment Fund.
Yeah, neighborhood investment funds, and but without any specificity, I believe the legislature will probably take that out.
Yep. One thing that I forgot is the nursing home, the supplemental aid on the nursing home. We got dinged about $1 million based upon
3.8 between Marathon County and Lincoln County.
So I would think that we would want to articulate a need to go back into the supplemental nursing home aid, because we didn't lose as much money as Dane and Rock County did. They shifted money to Dane and Rock counties, and in the net, it was a net loss of $1 million. I think that there is a desire on the part of the legislature to address that, given the surplus. And
so I also had that opportunity to discuss that specific item because I serve on the NCHC board. I am aware of the total amount of funding that between Pinecrest in Lincoln County and Mount View in Marathon County, there's an increase in the Medicaid reimbursement rate, but there was a supplemental payment that the counties were receiving, and historically that has been unchanged, and that amount, there was another part of another program that was to provide for losses that county-owned nursing homes received funding from. There was a reallocation of those funds, and 21 of the 26 county nursing homes in the state lost money, and pretty significantly. Again, Marathon and Pinecrest was a total of $3.8 million. And there was certain winners. Dane County, for example, received an $7 million surplus. So they didn't receive a cut, they received a $7 million surplus, as did Rock County receive about a $2 million surplus. Had a discussion with the senator. The senator is looking into it, trying to understand what the discussion was or what happened. Had some varying explanations from DHS, and I'm not sure which ones are 100% accurate at this point, but suffice it to say some people at the legislature are looking into it. But that is one concern, that because next month HR Finance will receive a request per our operating agreement from NCHC to make whole the loss that was created because of that funding. So there's going to be about a $900,000 request to Marathon County for that lost revenue that was created because of this going forward. So that's another item that's impacting operations at the county. Other inputs?
You got good news?
We might have a budget in July.
You just answered my question. I was inquiring when we could start looking for the budget in July, you think?
Well, we're supposed to have a budget by July 31st. There's a couple of things that there's a lot of rancor that's being stated right now that if this comes, I won't vote it, support the budget. If this, you know, so there'll be a lot of opportunity between now and July for discussion on the state's budget. But there'll be times when we think that the budget is absolutely going to be positive, and there'll be times when we think the budget's going to be actually negative for the counties. But I don't anticipate that we'll see the budget out of joint finance much before the end of June. Okay, then we will move on to item number 7C, and that is follow-up on the county board's presentation on workforce shortage, child care, and housing, and how do we determine what role, if any, the county will take in addressing these issues, both internally and externally. And I'll open that up for discussion. It's been on several committees' agendas for discussion. Finance had those discussion, or a little bit of discussion about child care and the lack of child care and how that's impacting the ability of Marathon County to recruit. Prime example is there was an applicant to a job in Marathon County that had young children, and when that person found out that there's a 2-year wait for child care, the person turned down the offer to come or remove their application. So it is impacting even Marathon County's ability to recruit, and I can tell you yesterday, as effective NCHC, which Marathon County is roughly 80% ownership in, had 44 positions that it was recruiting for, but that equates to 80.05 FTEs, and so that's really 10% of their workforce. So it is a challenge, and it's impacting our NCHC's ability to deliver services. Prime example is right now the 4th floor of the nursing home, the new nursing home that this county authorized and the board is authorized to build and construct, and we can't open it up at this point. We've just moved directions a little bit, but because of the ability to recruit CNAs and nurses. So it's really a challenge. So I think the same is true. I know last year at various points there was almost a 10% recruitment for the workforce for Marathon County. So I think the two things that go hand in hand. I think we heard presentations from WCA that the housing and the child care does create challenges for us and as our ability to recruit for workers. And I think what's going to happen, you probably will start to see this, is the private sector will start to find solutions to that, and they will start to opening child care centers in their own facilities to be able to use as a recruitment tool. So I throw that out for discussion. Supervisor Van Craig.
I want to make a comment that's important about child care, and it's not just the lack of spots available for children, it's also the lack of staff to work those. So you talk about a private business going to open up a child care, but where are they going to get the employees to work from that? And then that creates kind of a new problem that maybe the private industry can pay more than the YMCA or WASA Child Care, and their staff now are stolen from those spots. So it's not really creating more spots available, it's just benefiting the business.
Right, I mean, that was one of the discussions we had, that you can't just, continue. Obviously, one of the concerns that child care has is the pay range, and so if you start to increase the pay, the ability for the business to sustain itself is challenging. But if the company is going to subsidize it, and we're only stealing employees, so it's a matter of recruiting and bringing additional workers here. I also had an opportunity at WCA to see a presentation that 190 by the year 2030. There will be 190-some thousand additional jobs created and only 30,000 people to fill those based on current demographics. So So attraction rather than loss of personnel in the state, so outflow of workers out of the state, we have to start being to attract people into the state to be able to fill those positions. Otherwise, those positions are going to go unfilled and those jobs will not create economic activity. Supervisor Robinson?
Thank you, Chair. We met again yesterday and talked through the HR committee. We were focusing primarily on Marathon County as an employer, and it isn't only in the recruitment of workers, but it's also in the retention of workers. Numerous cases where people have left the workforce, and 35% of the women that left the workforce during the pandemic have not come back to the workforce, which is a significant portion of the workforce because of child care and the quality of life. If you're working for, at the end of the day, you're paying $30,000 for child care, and you're coming to work and making $33,000, are you really working for anything? And so they're leaving it. So we're going to be dedicating a good portion of our next meeting to talking about our employment practices and some of the issues and impediments to recruitment and retention of workers. And one of the things we want to look at is this item and how we compare in other ways, but to make the county a desirable place to work. And I think within that, there are opportunities to look at do we have the ability to have facilities and/or programs aimed at our staff, or in cooperation with others to make us that desirable place to work, and I think we'll take it from there. But I think we can't put our head in the sand, given the numbers, in the crisis that we have, and expect us to be able to recruit and retain that top talent. So I think somehow we have to begin to look at what's our appropriate role. Are there some innovative ways that we can either do it ourselves or partner with others and go from there?
Supervisor Booth.
So, for the first question, yeah, I feel 100% we do have a role. I will also say, I don't know what that role is, and I don't think anyone in this room knows what that role is yet, because we've been to numerous NACO, WCA, how are we going to get new employees, how are we going to get the workforce up. Some of the things we talked about at one of the meetings with Administrator Leonard, and I think up front there was a couple of us who talked about NACO, where, going into high schools and recruiting and stuff like that, but I don't know if there's we say, how are we going to do it? I don't know yet, but I think there's some things we can look at. But at this point, I'd have to look, is it even on the work plan as far as recruitment? Do we have that on the work plan, Administrator Leonard? I don't think we do we?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You did amend in the strategic plan that you just referenced, there was a goal that was an outcome measure, I should say, that was identified at HR Finance to address recruiting and retention, and that same strategic plan, public safety, made an amendment to that. That'll go to the full board about adopting HR policies that, I'm paraphrasing here, but to your point about making it a preferred employer and assisting us in retention and recruitment. So it's in the work plan, in the strategic plan and in the work plan for the HR Finance and Property Committee. I know I just spoke with Chair Robinson earlier this week about devoting certain meetings to HR policies. They've talked at that committee a bit about examining flexibility, which we're doing a lot of. On the staff side, we're really trying to be flexible. We can't necessarily just create child care spots, but we work around people's schedules to the best that we can, given the nature of our work. And speaking with Chair Robinson, we're going to talk about the benefit structure we have in terms of time off. If you look at holidays that are identified within Marathon County, we're below the average in the state of Wisconsin, so I'm not necessarily saying that means we need to increase one, but other counties are doing some innovative things. Kim just shared with me, she was down in Madison with the Constitutional Officers Conference, and a number of counties are going to changing their hours of operation, whether it's 4/10s, and we do that in in the highway department, for example. But hours of operation that you're open to the public, there's a number of counties that are now they're open Monday through Thursday normal hours and half-day Fridays. So HR Finance is going to talk about all those things. All those are important, but one of my main concerns is how do we do that in a way that still, of course, delivers service to the people of the county, because, you know, the flexibility that we would afford our staff if we go to half-day Fridays has the corresponding impact on other people. So we need to find out a way to as similar to Supervisor Van Cray reference with the child care dilemma, when you are just pulling workers from one to another, you can't just shut down operations such that it puts the same strain on other people. So a lot of conversations, to your point, what's the right mix? I mean, it's going to be a complex mix, because we have struggles. I mean, we have people where they have child care and then something happens with that child care provider, and then they just had a public health nurse, been with us for 6 months, had a child care issue, for whatever reason, wasn't stable any longer, loved her job, she was doing a great job for us, and she up and quit. Not sure that that's helpful.
Well, no, and that's what I'm trying to say is, I mean, I think this is something we're going to have to think about moving forward. We're really not making a decision today, but I mean, it's going to take partnerships and dealing with the business community. What are they doing? What we can do to help, things like that. But this is across the nation right now. Something that's going to be, oh, let's just do this and the thing's done. I mean, yeah, I think we do have a role, obviously.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the North Central Wisconsin Workforce Development meeting we had today, every supervisor that was there from the counties, everyone mentioned the problems with child care, or lack of child care, and affordable housing. And as Supervisor Van Cray brought up, Quick Trip opens up. They're paying $18-19 an hour. They're losing these child care providers because they're making $11-12 an hour if they're lucky. So, I agree with Supervisor Booth. I don't know what we're going to do, but every county from here all the way up to the northern part of the state that are in the workforce development, they have the same issues, and it's all, you know, because of the lack of housing and affordable child care. So you know, maybe we should have a task force on that. I don't know, I'm just kidding. It's you know, it is a problem. But,
sounds like you're volunteering.
Right, I'll
chair it?
Chair it, yeah. No, it's that it's been like that for the last 6 months. That's every meeting at the CO meeting, the elected officials discuss the workforce issues. Both of those come up every time.
You're right. We're not going to solve that overnight. I think the thing that you know, we need to do is be open-minded as to what are some options. You know, and again, we can't just sit there and pay more and rob the current employees that are currently employed by a child care provider just move to a new company's company-provided health care or child care center. That didn't increase the number of spots available. We need to be able to increase the number of spots so that we can actually do some active recruitment. Supervisor Van Cray, please.
Yeah, I have very minimal information about what other counties are doing in the state. So Sheboygan County had a $2 million ARPA ask approved, and that's funding to go towards retention and helping retain child care workers in Sheboygan County. Wood and Portage County both have pending asks to their county boards. Wood County is a $6 million ask, and that is to help with public-private partnerships and scholarships to make child care affordable for people. And then Portage County is a $1.7 million ask, and that is a 2-year proposal to support teachers' stipends and also assist with public-private partnerships. That is all the information that I have on those things, so I can't answer any questions further. I don't know, Lance, if you know any further. This came from like a very brief update from the Director of Child Caring, which is our local child care facilitator.
The only thing I'll add is that's kind of along the same lines, that retention idea of child care providers. That is the recommendation that came out of that Dream Up cohort that Maritime County was the lead grant applicant. There's this idea, hey, we need to bring new people And after a great many months of discussion, they said, you're right, we need to bring new people, but if we don't do something, we're going to lose the current providers we have. So that's why at the county board, you'll see that in the budget amendment that was approved by HR Finance. It's the recommendation to use that small amount of money, the $75,000 for retention. And a lot of counties are focusing on that retention.
Yeah, and also one other comment towards that topic of the retention of staff. My daughter is in childcare, reading through like the staff bios, right, of her teachers. They're in school at NTC for early childhood education. So I asked the director of childcare this week, what happens then when they graduate? And she said they go to the school district because the school district can pay more. They get summers off. It's more appealing to them. So that's the issue too, is to retain them at the child care centers.
Supervisor Dickens, please.
So unfortunately, last Friday, when I was meeting with Representative Rosar and Senator James, Elsa who came here, she was in Stratford talking to the superintendent of the schools, talking to several businesses and representatives. And I spoke to a couple people about that. And so just a few things. One, you mentioned, what we can do as a county. Well, part of it is as employer, and that goes to businesses as well.
Right.
If I was there, I would have asked those businesses, well, what are you doing to ensure that your staff have someplace to go? We had a church that closed daycare recently, and they lost 37 kids, which directly affects, obviously, the business in Stratford. So I'd be interested to know, why wouldn't they co-op together? Why wouldn't they look at a way? Another thing is the school itself. There are many schools that have daycares within their wall. They're not running it necessarily. They're getting someone to come in, and then they're getting a subsidy. They're providing the space.
Right.
So that would be something else to consider. But then there's that difference between what we're doing as a county, whether we want to do it for our employees, versus trying to solve the problem that exists everywhere. That's a difficult thing. Maybe there's something like incentivizing businesses that do implement their own child care. Right? So businesses that co-opt that way, maybe there's something we could offer that way. Maybe there's something with the schools as well. I don't know, just thinking outside the box. So those were a few ideas that came up from that. But here's another one as well, and this would be for our state representatives. Why don't they loosen the laws for unlicensed daycare providers? Right now, I think it's at 4, right? You have tiers, so 1 through 3, you have 3. So basically, typically what you have people do is they take care of their children, and then they take care of 1 to 3 other children, people in the neighborhood. Then when you hit 4, now you have to have family, and then when it's 9, it's group. So I would be interested to see why not expand that just by 1 or 2 children. I think it's 8 to 1. Now I do know people who do that. I know people who stay home, people who are professionals. But what they're doing is they're serving as a business, taking care of their neighbors. These are good people. Just because you have a license doesn't make you any better to take care of these children as unlicensed. That's just a fact. We have plenty of daycares that are licensed where there are significant issues. So I think that would be something potentially that we could offer to the state to say relax that slightly to help with the issue.
Yeah, it's very complex. I mean, when you sit there and look from a business model, the business model that you have out there is really challenging. I mean, the pay scale that the business affords is affordable, is relative. If you raise the pay scale for the employees, it means you have to raise the cost of child care that you're offering, which then equates to, well, is it economically feasible for me to continue to work with my cost of child care for my 2 children? And so, the one thing that's really come out in some cases has been the capital portion of that business model is not affordable for most child care centers unless it's subsidized through a different entity. So that's one of the things that, you know, the employers are looking at. But again, we can't sit there and I don't know that that's a long-term fix, is providing additional subsidies to child care centers, because that entails then when does the subsidy stop? Because if it doesn't stop, then they go out of business, that the immediate subsidy does end. I think there's challenges on that side also. Supervisor Dickinson.
Just one other thought that popped in my head. I wonder how much, talking about remote workers, people working from home and people doing remote work, I wonder how much that has affected where people are sending their children. Some of those kids are potentially at home, so is there any data that WCA or anyone has provided about that?
No, it's really difficult to get that data, you know, as to remote workers, especially with children at home, and especially even on licensed daycares. It's getting that data is very, very challenging.
If I can comment, to Supervisor Dickinson's point about, you know, how do you know when you're doing well, and what impact has remote work had? That group that we've had, that Dream Up group, they have talked for months and months about, you know, what are our best performance measures. The one that resonated for me, but sadly we don't have good data, is the idea of wait lists. Like, what is the average wait list if I want to get into licensed childcare? Because the wait list takes into account if I'm a parent and I have my children and I want to just put them with my neighbor, who is Supervisor Dickinson's point, is very good at providing care. I trust them. I'm not going to show up as someone that is in a licensed slot. But we know we don't, however you slice it, we don't have enough, because we have people that are on a list that they have to wait 2 years to get in. So I think it's going to be, to Supervisor Dickinson's point, there's a regulation piece, which is a state concern. Health has done a lot of work around how you're trying to get people go through the necessary certifications to get licensed. There's a lot more work to be done. One of the things I am going to look at in my own time is can we get a good handle on average wait list as a measure, similar to housing, right? There's a healthy turnover of housing. If you move to an area, to move there, by definition, you have to have a place either to buy or to rent. And you should have, I don't know what the healthy amount is,
stock,
but some
inventory,
available stock. I don't know what the healthy level is for when you have what is a good wait list. You want enough scarcity that you don't have an abundance of supply, where that's not healthy either, but that measure just doesn't exist.
Okay, anything else? Anything else on that discussion item? Again, we will continue to look at opportunities where they exist and have additional discussions, and I'm sure there will be additional potential ask of the full county board. With that, we'll move on to item number 8, meeting time and date announcements for the future meeting. Committee members are asked to bring ideas of for future discussion. Along that lines, next meeting is scheduled for April 13th, 2023, 3 o'clock. With that, we're down to item 9. We have offered with the facilities and the Deputy Administrator a facilities tour that's going to be offered. So after adjournment, I turn it over to our Deputy Administrator.
I'll move to adjourn.
Motion by Supervisor Longenon and seconded by Vice Chairman McEwen to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone. And so now I will turn it over to Deputy Administrator, please.